This is Rebecca Jernigan, your tour guide into discoveries, coming to you live from the heart of America to around the globe via the World Wide Web, satellite, and podcast. Let's journey together into the realms of the known to the unknown in search of enlightenment, knowledge, and truth.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet Earth. This is your host, Tobias Beharrell, and you're listening to Journeys with Rebecca, right here on wolfspiritradio.com and being simulcast every week on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com Studio B. Just a quick reminder to you that both Revolution Radio and Wolf Spirit Radio are listener supported, and I really urge you to give them a donation, big or small. It is very much appreciated. As always, JP is at the producer's guest desk tonight. Welcome, JP. How are you tonight?
Hey, Tobias. I'm good. I've had a fun evening so far.
Well, that is good news, and let it and may it continue. I'm getting all tongue twisted today. I hope that sort of dissolves itself.
It's all right. Take a breath. I think we all need to take a breath, and because we're having a little issue getting our guest on. Let's try this.
Sure, I will let you try that, and I will actually talk to the audience about our guest tonight. Tonight, everyone, my guest is an intuitive consultant, a Theta Healer, and a spiritual teacher whose life from early on involved some of the deepest and oftentimes painful experiences anyone can imagine going through. Yet from these experiences came an extraordinary evolution that came to include everything from angelic childhood visitations to a daily rapport with guides, archangels, and others. And I'm going to pause for a brief moment, and it looks like we probably got her on the line. I'm going to continue the introduction here. Hi, Lynne. Dr. Lynne Cockrum-Murphy will talk with us tonight about how it is possible to move from life as struggle to the richness that comes from exploring and coming to trust through experiences that there is so much more to it. She is an Amazon best-selling author. Her latest book is Unfolding the Mystery of Self, in which she reminds us that we are never alone and that we can always call out for love, support, and information. I know that you missed the beginning of the introduction, Lynne, but we're going to jump headlong into it. Dr. Lynne, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure having you here. Listen, I was just telling the audience about your best-selling book, Unfolding the Mystery, and actually we began describing that you are an intuitive consultant, a Theta Healer, and a spiritual teacher whose life from early on involved some of the deepest and oftentimes painful experiences anyone can imagine going through. I went on to tell the audience that you've worked through those and had incredible experiences, a real evolution that came to include everything from angelic childhood visitations to a daily rapport with guides, archangels, and others. So it sounds like you have quite the story, Lynne.
That is how people respond to it, like it is a dramatic life or a dramatic beginning to this life. And I would agree. It's just that because it was my life, I don't really reflect on it that way. I just like, you can think that the craziest things are normal, and it seemed that way. And now I look back and I see that I had a lot of karma. And the first 25 years of my life were really processing that, cleaning it out. And since then, life has been really peaceful and good. But at first, it was rough. And both of my books, the one before this one also goes into the story quite a bit. the loss of family members, the house fire I survived, and more. And fortunately, I don't have to live that way anymore. That part's done.
Right. Yeah. Well, it sounds like, yeah, it's easy it's not easy, but when we are living the experience, sometimes it's hard to look at the experience from outside as other people do. So, I've even said myself with some of my experiences, I guess from the outside, it looks like my life is kind of a TV movie or something with all the craziness and the drama and everything you can expect. But on the inside, you're just living it, right?
Right. Exactly. Seems like normal until you look back and go, wait a second, that was kind of extreme.
Well, exactly. So why don't you start telling us a little bit about your journey and what these early experiences brought you to discover? I mean, I know it's a big story. I know it's an ongoing story, but we're looking forward to hearing more about it. So just go for it, Dr. Lynne.
Okay. Well, I mentioned the house fire. I was 2.5. And I had 2 great parents and 2 great sisters. And I lost my dad and 2 sisters in that house fire. My father carried me out and saved me. And my mother wasn't home right then. She was over at my grandmother's. So that created loss. And you know, in the mind of a child, you don't understand why things happen. Make up your own little versions. And I lived in the hospital for a while and came home, and my mother, of course, was in incredible emotional pain because of her losses. So life was not fun. You know, I was in physical pain, too. And then I had this whole thing about being the only survivor. There's a thing called survivor's guilt, so I had that to process. And my father being, my hero, having saved my life, but perishing created inner turmoil for me. So I've spent a lot of my life trying to prove that I deserve this life. And those are some of the things that I've healed, that I'm at peace with. After that, my mother did marry again and brought in my little sister, who's 50 now, but a wonderful person. And she wrote one of the quotes that's in the book. She talked about her experience with our mother after our mother passed. And that's why one of the major themes in this book is we're never alone. And I talk about the different visitations I've had, but one was with my mother right after she passed. And she came into the room I was in, and I asked her, what do you hear? What do you want me to know? And I never heard any words, but I certainly felt the reassurance of, like, I still exist, I'm here, and I wanted you to know. So that was the message I felt more than heard. And then my sister talks about her experience. I don't remember if it was that day or the next day, and the comfort she got from our mother visiting her after she had passed. That actually wasn't until I was 25. So we are never alone. The angel story that I talked about in the beginning is being in my crib in the hospital at 2.5, and the 2, they were blue angels and rather short that visited. And I tell about who I think they were and the comfort that I got from them, and bless them for that, because I needed comfort. One of my favorite stories in the book is the one about the troll, and I just blogged on this the other day. You'll find it on my website and on Goodreads. That I was out walking in the Oregon forest with my uncles at a family reunion, and we're walking along, and I gasped, and they go, "Oh, what's wrong?" And I said, "Well, I saw a troll leaning against that tree over there." And they just paused, and they said, "Well, let's just keep walking." So I didn't know what else to say, so I was like, "Sure." And we keep walking, and they keep talking about houseboats and old-growth forest, and that's all there was to it. And that is a favorite of mine, because not only did I see a troll that day, I was not rejected for that. It was like, oh, Lynn's different that way. Okay. So,
how old were you at
family.
that point, Lynne?
Probably around 28. I think maybe a little younger, but I think I was already graduated from college and teaching school by then. So 27, maybe. Mm-hmm.
So they couldn't really poo-poo what you were seeing as a child's fantasy or anything. You're 28 years old around there, and you're saying, oh my God, there's a troll leaning against that tree up the path.
Well, and it's funny because after that, sometimes they would come to me, or their wives would come to me and tell me things like something they believed in, or ask me about, they found evidence of life on Mars. This was 20 years ago. What do you think about that? And sometimes I would be like, I hadn't thought about it. I don't know. But other times, it really caused me to be open about who I am and how the nice ways that I'm different. Being intuitive is different. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really nice how it opens the door just to be open and honest with your experiences, just like you described there. A lot of people have their own experiences, don't they? And then you say something about your own, or you're open about it, and it opens that door to make them sort of trust that you won't laugh at them or make them feel silly if they talk about what they're thinking in their heads. I think it's a great thing.
Right. Yeah, I talk about that in the book, that, a lot of us have awarenesses and we were taught to ignore them, and how not to ignore them, because so often things that are going on with us are things that we're picking up from other people because of our intuition. We want to respect that and how to deal with that, and that it can be as simple as driving down the road and thinking that you see someone standing on the sidewalk and you look again and there's no one there. Well, that's because you were seeing with your other sight. And when you look with your ordinary eyes, you can't see it. But with our other sight, we notice a lot of strange things.
That's so important. The sight that they don't really teach us about, they sort of just teach us in different ways, so we kind of forget it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in a lot of families, I think children are just flat out told, you didn't see that, or don't talk about that. And so you shut it down. It's very normal in the first, after about age 3 or 3 to 5, that you start losing that, especially when you enter school, because kids will ridicule kids so fast. I had a client for about a year who was 13 and as intuitive as anybody I've ever met. And, boy, that was fun to help her normalize that, to talk about it, to share the things that she wondered about. That was a really good experience for me. And she doesn't come as often now because I think she's much more comfortable with herself and who she is. The things that she would see at school that came in with the other children, sometimes she could ignore them, and sometimes she felt like she had to deal with them because they were pulling too much energy from the children. I hope your listeners are comfortable with what we're talking about, but this certainly is my world.
Oh, absolutely. They are very comfortable with these things. This is the best part of doing this show. Filling in for Rebecca Jernigan because they're very accustomed to these subjects, so no problem there, Lynne. It's awesome. A really great thing. It's really interesting because what you're talking about there with children between the ages of 3 and 5, I think you said, they're sort of shut down. And it's really what happens, it seems, is that the truth of our reality, the truth of the things that are all around us are sort of weaponized. They're sort of turned into a weapon against our understanding of what's real, and used against us through dogma and embarrassment and, that's not real. Isn't that something?
It is. It is. I have another client whose mother, she specified how her mother shut her down, told her that she was a little witch and she better stop that because witches get burned at the stake. Terrified 5-year-old. So, she shut it down. She doesn't have much of an ability to see within her sight now, and is working to regain that, and challenging you can have these gifts and not be a witch.
Yeah, that's
just one of the.
Go ahead.
that's one of the points in the book is that we're on the brink of a new period. Since 2012, this is a whole new era, and we're just at the beginning phase, but there's been so much change, and it's so beautiful. Some of the examples that I give is, it used to be you had to go to India if you wanted to learn about yoga, but now it's offered here at the YMCA. The world has changed a lot. Or that my sister, who is goes to a traditional church and doesn't practice metaphysical teachings or anything like that, but that she would write a paragraph for my book about her experience with someone who had just recently passed. The world has changed, and I also see that so many, and I can't speak with authority on this, but so many of our young people that are coming in differently with the high functioning levels of autism, they're really gifted kids. They're very aware. And it's not, I don't know that we will always label them as a disability category because they have giftedness. And it's like our lack of understanding, our old paradigms that are melting and falling away, that means that those people will step into their giftedness and being accepted.
Well, I wonder if in many cases the term, disabled when it comes to children like that is used in the same way that the 3 to 5 year olds are shut down by saying that's ridiculous. It's just sort of used instead of saying these are just different people. It's a new human. It's a new being or an evolution of sort, evolution of spirit at the very least, that there's actually, I'm trying to shut them down by saying, no, this is abnormal. And it's certainly in many cases, as you alluded to there, it's more normal than the everyday person considers normal in their own lives.
Mm-hmm. The incidence of the high-functioning child that has communication problems, referred to as Asperger's or referred to as autism, that incidence is increasing and increasing. I think that they're part of the change that is occurring in the world, just as we are the change that we've been waiting for. We are the change that the world is waiting for. And I don't have any of those labels, but the people that I work with mostly are ascended masters and coming into the awareness of that. It's really awesome that when I teach classes, people will come in going, well, I think I have some intuition. I'm just not sure. And within a day, they're doing readings and they're doing healings. They're hearing guardian angels and talking to them, seeing them. It's remarkable how fast people are progressing now. So I do think we are the change we've been waiting for.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the biggest dangers in our world and our time is if people think the change is going to come to them rather than from them, because then what happens is so often people will sit around waiting for somebody to come save us. And as you said, well, if we are here to change ourselves and change our own world, then it's up to us to make that change. I couldn't agree more. We don't want to sit around doing nothing. We want to expand on ourselves and our understanding and explore our own reality in our lives, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it is up to us to be vocal, to be honest, to be authentic, and to share with others, and to lead the way if that is your path.
Yeah, and it's not always the easiest thing, is it? When you are seeing things or experiencing things that other people, or so many other people, or even the majority of other people, don't seem to be experiencing in the same way. It does take courage, and that's something that's really, really a special thing. Because not everyone has that courage, especially at the beginning. But like you're saying there, it's interesting when you work with people within your environment there, how they can so quickly be brought to, realizing, okay, this intuition, this feeling, this thought, or maybe even this sound or voice or words in my head or words in my heart are actually real valid ways of gaining information from outside of myself and from within myself. It's amazing how quickly that can turn around in the proper environment, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It really can. And I think that I see it in a lot of people, just a lot of change, learning to listen to their heart besides their head, to give credence to those ideas that bubble up inside that you feel like you have to act on, not like an obsession, but more like, oh, this feels so important, I just can't let it go. So it's everywhere, and like your radio show, there are so many shows like this now. I guess it hasn't gotten as much to mainstream TV, but then there is, wasn't there the something medium that was a television show for a while?
Oh, yes. Yeah, Teresa Caputo. Well, there's several of them. I'm thinking the Long Island medium. That comes to my mind because I actually met her last year. She was in my city here. So yeah, that was the one that came to my mind.
Right. So things like that would have been blasphemy, 30 or 50 years ago. And now they're on TV. I love the way that it's changing. And yet, I've gone through my own about it, my family, how much they would accept. And yet I have to own it, that when I meditate, for instance, sometimes I see things, and when I ask what they are, I get information that is something outside of the realm of what I knew, and it's so rewarding. Feels really good. I don't have to go to the internet and look everything up. Some of it's just accessible through awareness, through consciousness.
Yes. It's so important, that very topic, because it's not just about information as if we're reading a novel. It's information that can be applied to your life in just the most fantastic ways, and not just menial information. Well, sometimes maybe it seems like that, but you can get real, absolute information, factual information, if you just learn to tap into these natural tendencies within your own mind. And it's really like it's like the psychic internet, and to me, that's much more valuable than Google.
I like that, the psychic internet. Yeah, because all you have to do is learn how to access the stillness within. And then I go up into the theta brainwave state as we teach in Theta Healing. And in that state, you have access to all information. It's kind of like our own beliefs and limitations that prevent us from knowing. So I was praying for Japan and the area that is still being damaged by the nuclear meltdowns after the tsunamis and the flooding.
In Fukushima,
yeah, that area is still leaking and it's still going into the ocean. And I was praying for all the water, the land, and all the people that live around there, then all the people that are working to clean it up. And I started seeing these images of things that are being created that their scientists are working to create to contain this, to change it, to stop it, and how, from the awfulness of what has happened and all the damage that was done, how the good comes out of it. We'll have new tools, new instruments, inventions that we'll always have because of that. So even though it was an awful thing, it is an awful thing, at the same time, how cool it is that good comes out of it. And we've seen it with, the people that have had to go through these hurricanes and the flooding or the fires in California, how it brings people together. They may experience great loss, but it brings people together and you end up feeling cared about and loved in a whole new way, and that's really important for humans.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
It takes tragedy sometimes to get there, but yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it does, but when those little golden nuggets come out of such horrible experiences, it sort of gives it a value that we have to sort of stop and look at. It's interesting when you're talking about Fukushima, for example, because not only on the scientific and human and levels like that can it benefit because of the new discoveries, but it's interesting, the thought that comes to my head was even on other levels, or things that are unseen to most. There's nature spirits, such as you were talking about. There's different levels of reality that come together to not only make things better, but new discoveries can come out of those combinations as well. So there's so many levels, seen and unseen. It's fantastic.
Yes. Well, I hadn't thought about the nature spirits. Of course, they're greatly involved. It's their earth and their water, their air. Yeah, their plants.
Exactly. One of my favorite stories that I've ever been told was a friend of mine. He was actually my guest last week on this show. And he was talking to me one time, a couple of years ago, I think. And he was saying there was really bad wildfires in California. And he has the ability to communicate with the nature spirits. And he actually went to them one night and found these fire elementals that he described as reaching from just above the ground to literally miles into the sky. He was quite intrigued with what they were to experience. But in any case, he was appealing to them to stop the fires, to please stop the fires, stop the loss, stop the burning. And they looked at him almost as though he was completely unrealistic. I won't even get into the verbiage that they used when they responded to him, but basically they were telling him, look, you don't understand, boy. Who do you think you are? We are doing what we need to do to purify all of the poisons in this area, regardless of what loss you think is happening. There's a greater balance of things that you're not acknowledging. So it was a huge lesson to him, but it's, I think, a really good example of how the unseen things, are working in coordination with the seen things, and it's a very, very important balancing act.
Thank you for sharing that. I had gotten that sense about some fires a few years ago, and I wasn't able to put it into words. And I knew that something good was happening, besides that, the earth benefits from ash, but that there was something else, something more. So thank you. I know also I prayed and prayed for the rains to come, and use the cloud building energies and such to work on that. And that fire persisted. I don't know that, it made a dent at all. That was one huge fire. I drove through that area about a week ago, and it was shocking seeing parts of town as I went down the freeway. Parts of town burnt to the ground. They were clearing the trees, the dead trees, and seeing shopping centers with major stores in the middle of them, or restaurants, burnt to the ground. It was very peculiar. What happened there is something special, something powerful.
Definitely, yeah. It's really important, I think, to sort of expand our own understanding of what might be the bigger picture of it, because certainly it looks like there's a lot of loss on one level, which certainly there is, but at the same time on a bigger level, if they're literally counteracting what could be or become even a greater loss, it's a lot more understandable, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, that's a good context to put it in. Because as humans, we have such limited perspective. Kind of have to go deeper into meditation or to higher sources to get an understanding. Because otherwise we can just focus on the loss or the pain rather than that bigger picture. I think that's one of the things that earlier events in my life taught me, is it very much caused me to seek, why is this happening? What is the point behind suffering? And then branching out my studies, because the religion my family handed me didn't give me answers. And so that's when I started to study Buddhism and psychology and later on Hinduism, to understand And then, that law of cause and effect, karma, came into my mind, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to know more. And at that time, I would get information from spiritual teachers about why these things happen, and then later it would just come to me in dreams or in meditation, and the balance that I saw occurring because of the horrific experiences I had early in this life, I was like okay with it. But I knew that if you'd asked my permission when I was 13, if I could go through some of those experiences, of course I'd say no. No way.
Yeah.
But we're not asked at that point. The agreements are made when we're in spirit. And then, when we're here in the physical, we go through those things, and sometimes you get to look back and go, oh, well, wasn't that a perfect balancing? That karma is complete, and I get to move forward from here without any of that. Clean slate. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I like how you describe karma because you said the words cause and effect, and I think it's important. I think many people think that it's just a punishment, and it's been very difficult for me to accept that there's a punishment. I think of it in the same way that you describe more as cause and effect.
Right. It is just action causing a balancing reaction. That's all it is. You can look at it just as science if you want. But it's also how we create the life that we have now. That I must have done enough good works and enough spiritual lives that I've gotten since age 25 to have a really peaceful, cool life, to be able to give and not just take, to be able to love and not just suffer. Yeah, but I also really think that the slate is clean, because now when I see karma happen, the kind of karma where where you get smacked upside the head kind of karma, that it's very immediate, and often I can see what I did that brought it on, and that's a relief, because when it's something from 3 lifetimes ago or 17 lifetimes ago, you're like, why would this happen to me? You have to go deep to get those answers.
Oh, that's for sure. It can be even more confusing and difficult to clear that stuff out when most people can't even remember it, right?
Right. You can't remember it. And as you pointed out with karma isn't just punishment. My getting to have this conversation with you, with Rebecca not being here right now. So I'm talking with you. And the people that are on the call and listening, that's my karma too. That's your karma. That's their karma. To be here and to hear this, however it strikes them, whatever doors it might open in their minds, that's good karma. Yeah.
Absolutely. I often say, there is a reason for everything. The reason may elude us in many cases, but there's a reason for it. So just to sort of absorb it or accept it or even learn what the reason is, that's a gift too. And I can't agree more. I think that, just the coming together and talking about these things is so important, because when we share stories and experiences, I say to my students, a lot of what I teach is not just written material that I've written, but it's stories that I've experienced, very much like you, Lynn. And I say to them, when we share our stories and experiences, we're literally opening doorways within the minds and the souls of the listeners, other people exploring it with us or other people participating with us as the audience is. And it's really, really important, because if we don't re-expand our minds and open them up from where they've been closed, for example, when we were younger and they told us that gnomes and little fairies and things don't exist, this is how we reopen our minds, through conversation and sharing. And it may sound cheesy to some people, but it's just the fact. This is how it works. A lot of times people come to me and say, oh, how can I do the things that your guests do? How can I do the things that you do? And I say, well, let's explore and open and expand our consciousness and talk about things. And that's how it all begins.
Yay. I'm glad they ask you those questions. And I think a very important part of the path is asking questions, because a lot of people have the pieces that we're looking for next. My first book, Living Hope, I talk about that's one of the things that helped me get out of the conditioning of mind that I had from being in a dysfunctional family. Because I could see that some people in the world were happier than I was. And so I asked questions. I studied people besides psychology and Buddhism. I studied people and then would ask them questions, and I let that be part of my guide. You talked about being open, and for me, I use the word malleable, that I was willing to flex, to bring in new ideas, and to reject the ones that didn't work for me. And that's what we do as we grow. And I do wonder sometimes, because I'm over 60 now, does it get harder as you get older? Because we have those things about older people have their mindsets, but I'm not sure. I think it's something that you can, if you believe in growth, if you believe in spiritual growth, and that is important to you, I think you can have it no matter what. Because I've seen people, I have an acquaintance who was a very devout traditional Christian become a metaphysical minister. And what a joy she is to be around. But she tells me that, 25, 30 years ago, I wouldn't have enjoyed her. So, yeah. And that person's in the 70s now. So, yeah, I guess it is possible. Yeah, we can be whoever we choose to be.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I've heard you mention Buddhism a couple of times. If I have your permission, I'd like to give a quote out of your book. Is it okay if I read a paragraph? It's not a scary thing. It's a wonderful quote. It says, the energy of life today makes some of the previous traditional spiritual teachings less relevant because everything is progressing much faster. Thank goodness, because when I read the Buddhist view on what it takes to reach enlightenment and the many traps, the many ways to get lost and to fall back, it scared and discouraged me. They explain even the possibility of getting stuck in nothingness or in bliss for ages, never reaching full enlightenment. Scary stuff. That's from your latest book. Tell us about that. Tell us about that. What's the difference between bliss and enlightenment?
Well, enlightenment, I believe, is the total awareness of who we really are. And I think who we really are, and I teach this, and I created an online workshop based upon this book, Unfolding the Mystery of Self. It's on my website. There are meditations there about you as eternal and luminous, an eternal luminous being. And that's how I see us, that we're consciousness, we're energy, and we chose to wear these bodies and be here right now. And some of our past has created the way that we chose to look like a male or a female, to have this hang up or that preference. But really who we are is something that never dies and something that is fully connected to Source. And we lose that full awareness. I think that we lost it a long time ago. I mean, like a long time ago. And then we've been finding our way back. And for Earth right now, this is the time to get all the way back to who we really are. So I'm not enlightened. I'm on that path. And the bliss are states, for me, that come and go. There's also the state of emptiness that I talk about in the book. And that is just a quiet place where there's consciousness, but there's no blabbering. Or the blabbering is so on the surface, and under that is the empty quiet, that stillness. So those are all parts of what is enlightenment. But bliss can be memories that I have of some other lives. The bliss was so engulfing and so satisfying that I accomplished nothing or little more on that in those two lifetimes. And that's part of what's important to me today, is to not get lost in that, because I want to be of benefit to the earth, to people, to my family. I don't want, what I remember of those lives would be more the ancient one with the nails grown out, who doesn't administer to his own needs, but is taken care of by the students so that he can just be in those bliss states. And I don't want that. I want to teach and share. I want everybody to move along. And that's another Buddhist teaching, is that, we keep coming back here until everybody gets enlightened.
Mm-hmm. So basically it sounds like you're saying that you can put your experiences of bliss to work for you to create enlightenment.
I don't know to work for you. But I know that they're part of the fun part along the way, that when I get to be in that state, it's like, oh boy, why would I ever stop meditating and get out of the chair and walk into the other room? Because it's pretty fun.
So that's a really interesting point. It reminds me of a topic that I've pondered and had conversations with over the years many times, and that is bliss is a wonderful thing, can feel great, but just like you just said, Lynn, you want to stay sitting in the chair instead of walking forward and doing things. Isn't that interesting when it comes to the topic that we spoke about a few minutes ago, which is actually creating a difference in our world and in our own experiences, and us saving ourselves rather than sitting in that chair, even of bliss. Even sitting in the chair of bliss could be the wrong thing to do. Do you agree?
For me, but I'm a teacher, so for me it would be to share it, and to anybody that says, oh, sign me up, or I'm ready, to walk with them. And I guess I wouldn't want to say anyone was wrong if they chose to do it differently, because I don't know their path and what brought them to this lifetime. So maybe for them their enlightenment would be different. I don't know. I think about those wonderful people I've read, Nisargadatta, Maharaj Ramana, and some of the other yogis. They're teaching and sharing. So and on that level, I certainly do agree. They're writing books, or they're talking enough that their students write books about what they said. And those are our guides. Those are wonderful things. But I guess if somebody else wanted to just sit on the mountaintop this time, maybe they worked their butt off the last 10 lifetimes. And so,
who are we to judge?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess they could do that. Yeah. I guess you could look at it this way too, that maybe somebody sitting there on the mountaintop, just exuding bliss energy is like a light flashing to other people that may pass by, saying, look, this is possible. Look, look into this. You should learn more, or think about this, or think about that. Just being in that energy could be a good thing, right?
Yes. In fact, people have told me that those lifetimes that I judged harshly because I was in bliss, but I wasn't fully enlightened, and I didn't offer much to others, they said, oh, your vibration did. Your vibration affected. Wow. Yes. How
cool is that? Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Another thing, Lynn, that I remember reading in your book is a comment that you made, that when you sit within that emptiness, it's not a loneliness.
Oh. Mm-hmm. It's funny, when you write a book later on, you're like, oh, I said that. That's cool.
You did.
Yeah, apparently. It isn't loneliness, and I've known loneliness, and I didn't like it. But this is a kind of feeling. I think because you're aware of your more of your full self, the consciousness that you are, the awareness that you are. And there's no loneliness in that. When we sit with the energy that is the energy of Source, which is what we are, yeah, there's just peace.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you were really talking in relation to, I guess, the fact that you were doing some clearing out of old patterns and different things within your experience. And once those were cleared, it made room for new things to experience. So it wasn't lonely. It was really something that you could refill with something that was more beneficial, I think.
Yes, well put. Well put.
Yeah.
So I think the third message of the book that I haven't really mentioned yet is the message of the freedom that we have today. And maybe this is much more so in America than in other places, but I think it exists somewhat worldwide, is we have the freedom for spiritual path of our choice, that we get to be, it's that whole conversation about, well, I'm spiritual, not religious, that we get to be spiritual in the way of our choosing, that we don't have to belong to a church or do a religion, although it's fine to do that or to take from it what you need, but that we get to have our own unique way. And look at how connected our conversation is, even though we've never attended the same church. And in our spirituality, we've found our own way, and yet we can have this connection. It's something special about this time period, and I'm really grateful for it.
Yeah, that's always an interesting topic to me as well, because there's been so many practices and schools of thought and different things, from the Kabbalah to the Tree of Life to Tarot to all of these different things throughout the ages. Religions are a part of that, where so many times historically people will spend or even commit their entire lives to a specific or singular practice. So it's really interesting in what you were just saying there, Lynne, because it reminded me that at the basic level of all of these things, there is a common denominator. So we can look at it from one end or the other. We can practice a specific a school of thought for our whole lives or part of our lives, or we can look at it as a whole and see what's common between this. And I think that could be a very valuable thing.
Oh, I like that. And that's what I've done in my studies of religions. Judaism, amongst all of them, as one that I hadn't mentioned yet, is to look for the commonalities, to look for the good. That they all seem to have, for instance, a guide as to how to live. They tell you how to behave. And, as a teenager, I resented that. But as an adult, I'm like, oh, yeah, people must need that, It's common to most all religions, or the ones I've encountered. Yeah.
Yes.
So I like that viewpoint, the viewpoint of the commonalities, the positives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it can really bring people together in a world where so many of these practices are used to sort of separate people. Not that they're all bad. I don't mean that. I just mean that so many times they're hijacked or, commandeered in some way and just sort of bring people apart. So to bring it together through a common understanding, I think has a great value.
Right. It certainly has taken people and separated them, that the Lutheran Church, for instance, has many different branches. A friend of mine who's a Lutheran had to explain to me that she belonged to this part of the Lutheran group, not that part, and et cetera. And it's like, oh my gosh, how complicated and how difficult. And to me, that it misses the point of what my belief system is for, the purpose of it. But, we're different. Some people really need the structure or the rituals of churches.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. They need to fill it in different ways, but I agree. I mean, I think to be able to be aware of what the common or what the final destination, so to speak, is, what the whole focus should be. It's not towards a separation or getting mad at each other or fighting with principles or beliefs. It's It's a matter of sharing so that we can actually come to a common practice, which is beneficial to everybody, isn't it?
Because it seems like there's some old saying about, as I lift my brother up, or as I lift myself up, my brother is lifted up. And that's what I would have. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to tell you a story, even though I'm backtracking a little bit. It reminds me earlier, right at the beginning, we were talking about just sharing stories and everything and how it opens doorways. When I was younger, I was probably 20 years old. I was visiting my grandmother, and she was the only one that lived in her house, and it was nighttime, and we're sitting there watching television, and she had this funny look on her face, and I knew she wanted to tell me something, but she was hesitating, and finally she looked at me and she says, "Tobias, I need to tell you something." And she said, "The other night I was sitting right here in my chair, and I fell asleep, and I woke up and I opened my eyes, and there was a fairy floating in front of me, right here in the living room. And when I opened my eyes, I scared her, and she jumped up, and she was floating in the air. She jumped up backwards, and she flew right out the window on the other side of the room." And I looked at Grandma and says, "Wow, that is so cool." And she looked back at me and she said, "I knew you'd understand."
Oh, how
Isn't it nice?
sweet. Yeah.
Isn't it nice
she knew that she
when
could
we can
trust
find
you
others?
with that.
It's just so nice when we can find others that understand, right?
Yeah, that we're not alone in this. Whether we see fairies or communicate with others, or if we share it with someone who's trustworthy. Yeah.
Exactly. Lynne, tell me about the 3 visions part of the book that you were talking about, your 3 visions.
I think that's the chapter where I talk about things that I had seen. One was there's with Theta Healing that we call program. So there was a program in my genetic code about sacrifice. And I was in a spa, and I'd had like a hot mud bath, and I was going for a massage and so on. And I had this moment where all I could see was Christ kneeling at the rock at Gethsemane and talking with his God about his upcoming sacrifice. And then I remembered these different lives that I have remembered, and the times that I've sacrificed myself, like into the volcano to provide for the village for that year, and how you do that with honor. It's an honor to die as a sacrifice on behalf of others. Well, I also believe that time period has ended and it's not necessary. So,
good.
Yeah, yay. So that program of sacrifice that was still in my DNA, I needed to deal with because my father had sacrificed his life for mine. And so in my 30s, I'm like, oh, I don't want this anymore. I truly appreciate what he did for me. Any father would do that if they could save a child. But I don't want to carry it in my DNA. And with Theta Healing, you learn how to clear things like that so you don't carry that programming anymore. So that's what that vision was about. So that was an important piece and put together a bunch of things for my understanding. But another one was just being in college in Oregon and looking out the window and not seeing the green forest on the mountains. I saw dry, brown, treeless mountains, and I was like, well, what's that? And what I was seeing was where I would live.
Lynne, I'm going to put you on hold right there. We'll hold that thought. Let's break.
Sure, I can hold that thought.
Awesome. We'll see you all after the break. Welcome back to Journeys with Rebecca. I am your host, Tobias Beharrell. Just a reminder to you that while Rebecca is away, she looks forward to connecting with you through her personal sessions, which she welcomes you to book with her as they become available. Of course, you can find Rebecca at www.journeyswithrebecca.com. And just a side note, Rebecca, we miss you and look forward to you coming back soon. I look forward to meeting many of you as well as I do through my sessions and courses, which you can find at etlanguages.com. Yes, ET as in extraterrestrial, etlanguages.com. If you remember last week, I first told you about the upcoming Worldwide Positive Orgone Initiative. Well, this initiative was pre-launched just a few days ago, and you are among the first to hear about it. What does this mean? I think this is very exciting, and I think all of you will really think this is cool. Many of you have heard about or use positive energy, such as that accumulated by orgonite. Of course, this is chi, or life force energy, the very energy that fuels psychic abilities, higher thinking, magic, and I believe manifestation of life itself. The Cyber Orgone Initiative allows you to experience this incredible energy, the same energy that the ancient pyramids were literally used for. You can use this for 2 weeks via a chi card that is emailed to you when you register. Yes, the energy literally is transferred at a distance through this card that you can either print out or use as a wallpaper on your cell phone. I've never before heard of anyone offering this opportunity. And all you have to do is join the Cyber Orgone Initiative for free and follow the instructions you get in the email. I hope many of you take advantage of this because it is a real movement that I think can be very beneficial. It's an incredible opportunity not only to change the world, but to supercharge your own abilities and practices. And I really wish to share it with all of you worldwide. I'm really excited and proud because I believe more understanding of this and what the ancient people always knew will culminate in truly making our world a better place now. To do this, simply go to my website at etlanguages.com and click on the photo of the pyramids in the upper right-hand corner. It will take you to the site where there's much, much more information available. There's even prizes and many other gifts available for you the more you share this initiative with your friends and family. It is actually sponsored and created by Carl Hans Wells, the creator of the term orgonite, and he is a fabulous man with incredible knowledge dating decades, if not more, and I really urge you to take advantage of it. Thank you all in advance for being part of it. Again, just hit my website, etlanguages.com, and click on the pyramid picture in the upper right corner. Next week, join me again. My guest will be Jane Bernard, author of Lucid Living. Jane lives in Brooklyn, New York, and is known as the Intuitive Scribe. The Intuitive Scribe, that sounds very interesting. You can find more about her at her blog, Intuitive Scribe. Let me say it again, intuitivescribe.blogspot.ca. Tonight, we have been talking with Dr. Lynne Cockrum-Murphy, Amazon best-selling author of Unfolding the Mystery of Self. We Are Never Alone. Lynne, welcome back.
Hi, Tobias. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Can you believe how fast that first hour goes?
And that we covered so much. We've talked about our whole lives.
Yeah, it's been so much fun already. Absolutely. So before I and the music cut you off, you were talking about something to do with looking at the forest. Would you mind picking that up again for us?
Oh, I was just talking about a vision that I had where I looked out the window and it should have been green forest because I was in Oregon, and instead I saw brown hills. And what that was a picture of where I would live. I guess it was actually only about 10 years later. And then after we moved to Arizona, I remember looking up at the brown hills and going, oh, those are the hills. That's it. Now I know what that is. And I think that's one of the challenging things about visions. Maybe, sometimes you get the information immediately what you're seeing, and sometimes you get it later on. There's another one that I'd mentioned in the book about, being in Northern California, in San Francisco area, inland by, beyond Vallejo, around Fairfield, I guess, and sitting up on a hill with a group of people having a picnic and looking down below, and then seeing it filled with water and going, what am I seeing? Why? There are freeways and houses down there. Why am I seeing water? And eventually I found out that was the future that I was seeing, and that is because of what we now understand of global warming and the melting of the ice caps. And so that area that I was seeing will have a great deal of water in it at some point in the future. I don't know, what year. I've never been told what year. Just that it's the future. Yeah. So I know when I think about buying in California, I don't think about buying down on the beach. I think about buying up higher.
I guess so. Yeah, better safe than sorry if you've seen things like that. It's fascinating because this information, like you said, it was a vision. You had visions. I mean, this is the type of thing that people, a lot of people hear about, but they find it difficult to sort of differentiate between information coming from different places in their own minds. I'll give you an example. Just the other day I was working with a client, and I'll make this a long story a short story, but I literally was remote viewing, scanning within her body because it was related to health issues and different things. And I saw something specific. I know what I saw, but I couldn't identify it. So I literally asked myself, or anybody else that was listening in my head, I suppose would be fair to say, I asked, what is this? And I literally got a terminology. It was 4 words that came to my head. I didn't tell the client right away what those words were, but I actually Googled it because you and I, Lynn, we were talking about Googling versus the psychic internet earlier. So I said to my client, okay, I got some information from, mentally scanning you. I would like to just check something on the computer. So I checked it on the computer, exactly what I had heard. I read what it was relating to, and it related to a lot of other things we had done previous in the session. And then I said to her, okay, so you know that you have some specific issues with this. And I said the 4 words. And she put her hands to her mouth and she went, oh my God, yes, how did you know? And that's just an example of how information is everywhere, right? Whether it's in a vision or in what you're listening to in your inner heart or your inner hearing, or perhaps it can be from your higher self, your timeless self, or perhaps it, as you alluded to, it can be from higher masters, different spiritual guides, different people that you can actually connect with and communicate with. I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about how that all works and what you do within your practices to help people connect with these things.
Okay. Wow, that was very complete. There are so many places that we can get information from. One of the things that I do, and I've done since I was 19 years old, is I became a vegetarian in part because it allows us to have higher vibrations. And I want the highest vibrations I can have so that I can bring in information from higher realms. And that's one of the benefits of Theta Healing, is that we learn to access information through the theta brainwave state. Originally, when I taught meditation, I only taught people to go to the alpha state because that's all I knew. And once I learned to go to the theta state, things rapidly changed for me. And so that's what I teach others to do, because we want to access the highest, the very highest that we can. So those two things go together, the theta state and then my vibrational rate. And then I do ask that everything that I get be filtered through creator, source, whatever you choose to call that. I call it God sometimes too. And I want it filtered through there because all beings have opinion based upon their own experiences. The highest beings, the Christ-like beings or the enlightened beings, probably have the least, but they might still have some viewpoint. So I really make an effort to access their guidance through the totality of all that is. And then I'm sure that I'm getting guidance that I'm okay with sharing with someone. So I hear it like you heard the 4 words. It's kind of nice. And yet, sometimes it's still a bit of a guessing game. Like you heard the 4 words and you checked against a reference, a source, to be certain of what that was. And when I hear a single word, today I was working with someone, I heard the word deliberate, that something that she was unhappy about in her life, she had created deliberately. And so we started talking about that and then got to what that was really about. So sometimes it's that way. I guess the other thing is that there are other entities that don't have our well-being in mind, and I want to be sure that that's not who I'm listening to. And I think with training and with high vibrations, you get pretty good about dealing with that. But it is something to be aware of, that if a person is drinking or drinking much, you have to be really careful. If you're using drugs, then it opens your energy field to other things. And so you want to be very aware. One of the responsibilities that I have in this life is to help beings who are deceased cross over and move to the light. And that means they show up, and I talk about it in the book. They show up, and, part of my job is to be aware and tune in. Oh, this sensation that I'm feeling is a being, and they're here. I can allow them to be here and bring them my vibration, or I can help them get to the light so everything changes. But they also show up in my dreams, not as much as it used to. I'm not having to do as much as that work as I did. But yeah, they show up in the dream, and I mentioned a couple of them in the book, that I'm dreaming and I see this person pull up in front of my house in a car and say, "Hi, this is so-and-so, I'm here." And I'm like, "What is this about?" And I'm like, "Oh, you came to go to the light." And then right behind her comes this guy, like, "Yeah, and it's Sam, and I'm here too." And so, I do the process to get him to the light. So I just wanted to mention that because as much as we can get the most amazing guidance, you have to have the gift of discernment. You really need to know what you're doing. And so having good training, and I think that a lot of programs do have that kind of training. For me, with going through the Theta Healing training, it made it so that I went from being worried or afraid about some of that stuff to really confident and capable. So thank God for that. So I'm very comfortable with my work today. The other thing you mentioned was the body scan, and that's something we do in Theta Healing too. That's really fun because when you look in a body with someone's permission, sometimes I see the organs and other times I see symbols. And then, bring that up to the client to talk about, well, I saw these 3 things. Which one would you like to talk about? Or this one really got my attention. What do you think that is? And getting a dialogue going there. Because they may have some real thoughts about it, or they may not. So I like to work with the client on it. And as you were describing, like you're not just doing to or for them, but you're working with them to help them get what they want.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always an interesting topic to me, body scanning, because a lot of people cannot it's very difficult for them to wrap their minds around. And it was for me also at the very beginning, because I simply had never tried it. I was told by one of my teachers, "What do you mean? Just try. What do you see? Look in their body or look in my body." I said, "Well, how do I get there from here?" And he said, "What do you mean? Just do it." And that's another example of getting over the preconditions that we either impose on ourselves or the world, or the limitations that our world or society can oftentimes impose upon us. by limitations. And I know that's something that you spoke about in your book quite a bit as well, is these limitations that you, or these beliefs that you had about yourself or your own limitations. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that?
I'm not sure which ones exactly you're referring to. Everybody has limiting beliefs. They can be in our DNA. They can be just things that we've picked up in this lifetime. They can be from they can be from the collective consciousness too. Or even on a soul level. And we identify those and remove them. Oh, poverty was one that I talked about in the book. Having so many relatives that lived through the Great Depression.
Right.
And so, they could never have enough in their mind because they had lived without, and it was extremely serious at that time. So that was something that I've cleared for myself, that no, we live in an abundant universe. There's no poverty here. That's an old misconception that can be pulled. Just you pull it out of your energy field and download new, more positive beliefs, feelings, bits of knowing. And it's really fun because things change immediately inside, and then you get to manifest that in your life from every decision from there on. We were talking about looking inside bodies or remote viewing. I learned it as the body scan, but then have done more remote viewing, but was really empowered by talking with a woman who lives in Sedona, Arizona, and wrote a book. And she works for the government doing remote viewing, she and her spouse. And she gave examples of the kinds of things they would do, where they would be asked to look in a foreign country, in a building, in a particular city, in a particular room, and describe what they saw. And then the government would take that information from several different people and determine if they needed, there was a threat there, if they needed to deal with whatever was in that room, in that box, kind of thing. And I had read and heard about that stuff, but she was the first person I'd ever met who'd actually done it. And that was really validating and really cool. So, we really learn the limitations of our bodies and of our culture and of this time period, the previous time period, and none of those limitations have to hold us back. We're capable of so much. It's amazing. I was reading a book, Pam Grout, E Cubed, I believe, and she talked about someone, if I can remember who it is, I'll say, but I don't remember right now. Someone who was hypnotized and told that his daughter was invisible, and that when his daughter then stood in front of him, he could not see her, and claimed she was not in the room. And they held an object on the other side of the daughter, and he could see the object, but he couldn't see that the daughter was actually blocking, that he shouldn't be able to see the object. That's how amazing our minds are in taking what we're told. So anything that we've been taught that doesn't serve us, we can reject. I use Theta Healing, and I learned that through Vianna Stibble, who created it. She's in Montana. She teaches all over the world. So that's my technique, but obviously there's a lot of other people that have these methods too that people can study with. And I say go for it, because all of us have so much more ability than we think. Let's throw away our limitations and be all that we can be. Be that true self, that true luminous being that we are.
Absolutely. Throw out the garbage that tells us we can't, and just try it so we know that we can, right? Vienna Stibble, interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about the Theta Healing, how it works? I know one word that you mentioned before we went to break tonight was actually the word program, which I use quite a bit. Sometimes it's triggering to some people, but I look at these things within our bodies or energy fields or whether it's emotions or physical illness, as programs in the same way that I look at a computer hard drive recording information. Is that how you relate to the word program with Theta Healing?
We do run a lot like little computers. Put information in and integrate it with other information, and then when we find something that doesn't fit, we kick it out. Absolutely. Theta Healing is based on using the theta brainwave state, which puts you in states of higher consciousness. So you have access to Creator's wisdom, Creator's knowing from there, and our limitations drop away. It reminds me of my aunt was sick, and I was doing some healing work with her, and I thought, oh, she just has a cold. She's not feeling good. We can heal this. And when I got into that other state of consciousness, I realized she's really tired of living. She's really tired of this life. And this down period that she was in with her health right then was the beginning of, I don't want to be here anymore. And that changed our conversation greatly from I'm dealing with a cold or a flu. So those higher states of consciousness are really beneficial for doing that kind of work, any really personal work with people. So programs, to me, are also the same as beliefs. When I think a person might feel sensitive about my saying they have a belief of so-and-so, I might use the word program instead, or vice versa. If program sounds too weird, I might just use belief. But they're very, very pretty similar. In Theta Healing, we teach the different levels that things are held on and learn how to clear it from each of those levels. It works remarkably fast. I worked with a woman today who was blocking her abundance, and it appeared to be, at first, just because of overspending earlier in this lifetime. And then as we were talking, I realized, no, it's multiple lifetimes. And she muscle tests herself very well, so I had her muscle test. She's also a teacher. And had her muscle test herself, and it was, she was preventing herself from having abundance now because of all the time she regretted how much she took, how much she spent, how self-centered she was with it, how wasteful she was, and it was that kind of like, by God, I'll never do that again, and bam, you have a program. And so with the Theta Healing, we undid that today. So she has the freedom to have abundance and to trust herself not to waste. That she can do well by herself with her abundance. She can do well by other people with her abundance. So, and that part of that is the download process that goes with it. So, the only other thing I guess I would really say about Theta Healing is we do think that we facilitate the work, we ask the right questions, we listen for guidance, but it is the creative force, the totality of all that is, that does the healing, that does the work, that pulls these things or eliminates them out of our auras, and gives us the downloads that I don't think as a person I can give myself credit for all that, but working through Creator, a lot can happen, but Creator makes the miracles. Yeah.
So it's interesting because, basically programs, talking about the daughter who was invisible, it's like these things that are coming up within your clients are invisible until you go through these with them in this Theta Healing, hey?
Yeah, very good point. Right. They are invisible to us. Yeah, very good point.
So the Theta...
We can see...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, until we can see the connection of this is in my life because I believe this, or because I would never allow that to happen, and this is the only way I knew to prevent it. One of the things we talk about is clearing resentments, regrets, grudges, rejections, that kind of stuff. These are all the energy it takes up of ours. And how resentments, we create resentments mostly to keep people away from us. You know, like, this person really offended me back in 1972, and I resent them, and therefore I don't let them in my life. Well, there are other ways to go about that without carrying resentments. So go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say that, I mean, these subconscious programs or suggestions even could be resentment, or they could be the invisible daughter. It just makes me realize that there can be so many things that are beyond our conscious view that are affecting our lives. And until somebody can take you into that whole atmosphere, that whole, as you call it, the theta healing, then they sort of surface then, right?
Right. And even sometimes with some resistance, working with someone the other day who didn't want to let go of a program that she must carry. She wears a cloak of responsibility for another person in her family. But this person now is 50 years old and pretty capable of taking care of herself. But this person was still wearing the cloak of responsibility for that person, which ends up looking more like enabling. And so in changing that, you know, at first she's like, yeah, but no, because she needs me, and it's important, and I must. And the more that we talked, that resistance let go to where she was able to go, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Yes, I want her to be able to be her own adult self and to allow that to be, to get out of the way. And so then the programming was pulled and things changed. It's really interesting how a lot of this, I guess it would be like psychology. You don't know what you know until someone explains it to you. You don't know that you're doing this until someone shows you the connections, and then you get it. Yeah,
like just through awareness of it, right?
Yeah. In fact, sometimes just talking with the client about some of this stuff, the programs start dissolving before we actually do the theta healing process for it, because of their own awareness. They're like, oh yeah, that doesn't serve me. And it starts dissolving. It's really nice because that makes it easier to do the work even faster.
That's what I was going to ask you, like the process. I mean, how do they clear or let go of things? Obviously it's through that awareness, as you were just describing. It can begin dissolving it, but can you tell us a little bit more? The audience is interested in understanding how the theta process works. I'm going to ask one question in addition to that, related, and I'm sure you would explain it. But the theta state, obviously the theta state is a brainwave pattern that facilitates focus and well, I guess what's the best way to describe the theta state? Is it a very deep relaxation?
Right. It is actually one of the sleep states, but we remain awake and conscious when we're in theta. The real advanced meditating monks, that was the state that they would use. It wasn't the average meditating state. It's deeper. It's a very slow brainwave state. There's, delta is slower, and sometimes we go into that. And we do have some science that shows, some testing and measuring that shows that this is real, that the brainwaves do change. And that's based upon previous science and lots of experiments that show what happens with brainwaves. Yeah, the TM meditators a long time ago established a lot of this. For us. So that's the brainwave state, and you learn through practice, that you go there in a moment. In the beginning, the first class takes about 3 days, and the students are pretty confident about getting into that brainwave state, that state of higher consciousness. And yet, people have beliefs of like, oh, I can't talk to God. I can't hear God. And so we have to clear those beliefs, because of course you can. You're part of it. So then the process for me is I go up into the theta brainwave state and make that connection with Source. And then I ask, Creator, this person has a belief in so-and-so. And I ask Creator to pull it, and I give specifics on all the levels I want it pulled on. And then I ask for specific downloads for that person to support them so they don't have to take that belief back. And Creator does all that. I watch the energy move. I watch the change occur energetically through my mind's eye, and then let it just occur. And if it doesn't occur, then I work with the person as to what are the blocks. Like I said with the person before who's like, no, I can't give up responsibility for her. She needs me. Well, we can work through that. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how the process works and why I say I'm not the one who actually does it. I set up the circumstance and ask that creative energy that makes us in our world, I ask it to do it, and then I watch. And you know how things to come into reality they have to be observed, like in the movie What the Bleep and Down the Rabbit Hole. Those films talked about the observer effect, and that's why we make a point of observing it coming into reality.
Yes. Yeah,
and that's
there's
just
so
kind of
much.
the beginning of theta healing. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's so much. And then you add to that the fact that, as we alluded to earlier, we're discussing a little bit about the fact that it's not just this lifetime, but it's other lifetimes. And that's part of your book.
Yeah.
In fact, you're talking about in this lifetime, and then another chapter is called So Many Lives, and then there's another one called Concurrently. Why don't you tell us a little bit about those three chapters, how they fit into everything here?
There's one in which I talk about a bunch of different lives that I became aware of on other planets, Atlantis, and, back in, what was that war? The war of, something in the, an American war. So I think there's a point in our growth that it's really important to know those lives, and we want to remember them, and we start seeing connections and getting a bigger picture. But then when you realize the thousands of lives that you've had, it becomes less of a focal point. And so I put it in there because it was part of my path, and this book is very much about developing your own spiritual path and going for it, and tools and resources along the way. So that's why that's in there, but I certainly put a whole lot less emphasis there for me today. It's funny because I'm not remembering concurrently very much. I think, it's mostly about the fact that everything's going on at the same time. There is no time. That time is just a construct that we have here. And if, like in that movie, and he goes to the other planets, and the time is different on each planet, and you really see how you're going to age very quickly on this planet, you're going to live a really long time on that planet, but here, our time is what it is, and it's a construct so that all of us can kind of be in agreement and work together. So anytime you want to start working on releasing the restrictions of that, you can, because everything is happening at the same time. I think another reason that we don't always get that is because our minds, our ordinary mental mind, is not quite up to the chore of understanding how that works. So it's easier to get when you're in higher expanded states of consciousness. So that's some about those.
Yeah, it's interesting because, even in biblical references, it talks about one day to God is actually 1,000 years to us.
Oh, that's a good example. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also brings me to my question of the night. And it's not specifically for you, Lynne. It's something that I promised the audience in the chat room just at the break that I would be giving them a question of the week. But it relates to what we're talking about here. And this is actually a message that I got from one of my students just before the show tonight. So I'm totally using my student as the question of the week. And here was her question. She said, is it possible to reincarnate into a different time period? I thought that was just a fascinating thing to think about. What do you think about that, Lynne?
That is a good question. Very thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Because everything is concurrent, the answer must be yes. If it suited me to go back and be a nurse in World War I don't know for sure if I would actually be having a full life there, visiting a life I already had and doing it different, or watching someone else's life. And I suppose it doesn't really matter if you can go there and glean what it is that you're looking for. And there are a lot of different ways to do that. Because it sounds like, well, someone might want to do it so that they can, a soldier might want to do it so he can save his infantry. And someone else might want to do it just because they loved that time period so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose you could. The trick would be being conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Conscious of it, taking your current awareness with you.
Right.
Yeah.
I guess
that was a deep one.
I know. I love your response. I think in a way, I guess what we're talking about is that we could be doing that right now. Maybe we are in a past time period right now and we haven't brought our thoughts and memories through with us. Or are we in the future?
Yes and yes.
Yeah. And when my quick response to my student on that question was this, I said, well, you know what? I've literally gone astrally, as they call it, fully consciously, astrally and here at the same time to other time periods. I've been in healing chambers, the most fantastical things that most people couldn't even imagine. And absolutely, my answer was, if I can do it while I'm alive, why can't I do it while I'm not in physical body and actually incarnate there? Makes sense to me.
Right. And then there's the multidimensionality of us, that everything happening concurrently, wherever it is that person is asking about wanting to be, they're probably also there. And then
yes.
We exist in other dimensions at the same time. And some people do have awareness of that. I've talked to a couple people that do. I personally don't, and that's okay. It's not my path to explore that at this point. We're pretty amazing and pretty complex, and you can go as far as you are open to allowing for yourself.
Yeah, it's really, I think it's just movement of the consciousness, and it's the same for many of the things we've discussed tonight, with remote viewing or with looking in through a person, scanning them, or just being aware of information around us. It's really just moving our consciousness, and most people, I think, that don't do and talk about the things that we're talking about, I think they're sort of holding their consciousness within the moment and not sort of realizing they can project it forward. I think that's what daydreaming is. As we're kids, we're projecting into different times, forward and backwards, and through that daydreaming, we're getting information which we could actually use now. Isn't that what it may be?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I just remember it as really magical, and how happy it made me being able to do that. Creating other worlds and fantasies, and I had no idea how real or unreal it was, but it was really satisfying. And I know I've thought about it as an adult, like, I want the freedom to daydream with that kind of fantasy reality going on at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a quote that I've given my students and probably this audience several times, but I'm going to share it again with you. And I say to them, what difference does it make if it's real or imagined? Because once it is imagined, it truly is real on some level, in some dimension.
That's true. That is
Yeah.
true. And that our mind, these brains, do not differentiate between what it has really physically experienced and what you tell it. And that's why we can rewrite our stories. So,
Yes.
I have an alternative story going as to what happened with that house fire. In my alternate story, that furnace never needed to break. It was repaired. It was replaced earlier. All kinds of neat things happened, and that furnace didn't explode. My family just moved out of that house a couple of years later because we outgrew it, and we got a beach house. And and then I and my sisters and I grew up, and we did it, and went on to college, and because the mind doesn't know the difference, the brain doesn't know the difference. So I have two stories going, one that I'm letting go of, and the other one that I'm having a lot of fun with. We can also do that with what we are creating for our future. So if you would like to have that home at the beach, or that cabin in the mountains, or whatever, to every night before you go to sleep, visualize it, tell yourself the stories about it, and enjoy it. And on some level, it's real. And it may come into physical manifestation later on, or it may not on this plane or at this time, but your brain thinks it's real, so your brain gets all the happiness out of it. Go for it.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is that you can almost do the reverse thing as well. You can imagine something and go into a space and find later that it was an actual space from your past which was holding information, and that you can glean and absorb from that space, just going there thinking it's not even real at first.
I think we're full of possibilities, and some of this is played out in counseling now, where therapists will have you can relive what happened and experience it somatically, physically, and release it for trauma. Or you can also create a different version. It's kind of like when you have a bad dream, and I don't mean like the kind that just scares your pants off and you want to run out of the room, but just a bad dream. And when you're laying there in that half-awake state, just change the ending of the dream. So, when the boogeyman came to the door, I said, "Get out, and you're never coming in here." And I had a police officer stop in front of my house, and the bad guy ran away. And, and then you're like, "Oh, that was fun. Okay, I'll better. I can go back to sleep now." Create the reality that you want. And it's easier in that partially asleep state. That's kind of a very manipulative, I can't say that word. Easy to manipulate state.
Yes. Absolutely. And you know what? I was just talking about that recently on another show. Sort of that space where I was I was laying on the couch one afternoon, in that state between awake and asleep. I was aware, but I wasn't completely awake. It was a different theta state, or a different state of some type. And, and my cell phone was sitting on the table in front of me. But in that state, I heard my cell phone indicate that there was a message sent, and the message said, "I'm on my way." And that actually did not happen in the physical world until about 30 seconds later. And then it happened in the physical world, and I opened my eyes and read, and it said, "I'm on my way." Because we do, again, there's a real example of projecting consciousness, because it is not just fixed. It's just simply not just fixed. And those states, when you describe the theta healing and those states, the benefit of those states and what you can accomplish within them, it makes perfect sense to me given the context of this story, because we can go forward, backward, up and down in all different places, and we really have an abundant and colorful and expanded view of things.
And how things are static and locked in time, because you were aware of the future as you were laying there in a semi-sleep state. the future was the present, and then the present was the present. So that's a really good example of how things aren't locked in.
Yeah. It also reminds me of another story. I'm full of stories tonight, Lynne. I love your stories, and I love sharing my stories with you and the audience. It reminds me of another thing related to what we were discussing, and that is in the energy body or the astral form. You know, as I was discussing, I've been places astrally, and I used to think, and early on I will say, I believed, well, what's it going to do? It's not really going to affect me because it's just my energy form. But I literally experienced, probably the first time I did that, I experienced being taken by a friend of mine to this type of healing chamber. There's a large spherical crystal hanging over this wooden bed, basically. It was like a sun tanning bed, but it was just a crystal ball above it, a large crystal ball hanging from the ceiling. And, they were actually using it to energetically burn out heavy metal toxins in my body. And after laying there for about 10 minutes, about 10 minutes passed, and I was actually becoming quite bored. And at the same time that this was happening, I was actually talking with my friend back here on good old planet Earth right now on Skype. So we were literally in two places at one time, quite realistically.
Very good.
And I said to them, I said to my friend, who was actually outside the door where I was sitting, laying on this bed, I said to him in my mind, is there any way they can hurry this up? I'm getting bored. And so he actually asked the practitioner that was running this spherical crystal, and the guy basically said, well, we've never used it on full power, but if you want to, we can. And so it went brighter, and it was stronger, and I thought, great, good, we'll speed this up again because I was getting bored. And, the next day, I woke up back here in my bed, and my eyes were burnt. And not only were they burnt, it took at least a month before my eyes healed from being burnt. So there's a lot more to be said for interdimensionality, dimensional healing, and all of these things that meets the eye. It was a really good experience for me, especially as an early on experience, because I realized there's so many things on so many levels that truly, truly affect all of us in different ways, and many times the way they affect us are unseen, right?
Right. That's an excellent example of bilocating, and that you actually had physical results from it that were apparent. It also is a lesson in, being patient and going with things to the limit that it's tested already. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Good to push the boundaries, but ouch. Yeah.
Absolutely. Quite a 30-day at least ouch. It's just fascinating. Wow. These things that we go through. Another thing that was in my mind from earlier, something that you mentioned about people opening, having to realize that when they're drinking alcohol, for example, they're opening themselves up, literally. And I was just going to comment that they don't call alcohol spirits for nothing.
Oh, that is so true. And apparently there are spirits attached that you can see, like you would probably see with someone energetically, the spirit of cocaine and what she looks like, or the spirit of whiskey and what it looks like. Yeah. We don't want to go there. When I was in my teens, I experimented with some psychedelics, and it did open some things for me that look like the Matrix. You know how the Matrix looked like numbers running. For me, it was seeing colors and tiny shapes in patterns like that would cover everything. It would be in front of everything that I could see. And it took me years after I quit doing drugs and chose a spiritual path instead. It took me years to get that to stop. And I can see it now by choice, but it's rather distracting, so I choose not to see it all the time. But since then, I've understood spiritually on what plane that was, what level that was that I was seeing, and what it means. But that's an example of opening something and having no understanding. And I'd rather do things through the spiritual realm and with spiritual teachers to get it right the first time. So I don't have years and years of going, oh, make that go away.
Well, yeah, I mean, just think about it, just from anybody that heard my story about going astrally to the healing chamber with the sphere crystal, probably won't be telling themselves that what happens in the astral cannot hurt them here. So it's all of these experiences that we can learn from other people and really get some value out of, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. That's a good one. Because I would think pretty much in the astral we are safe.
Yeah.
But you pushed the limits. You said yes to pushing the limits and learned about it. So.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting you're talking about the spirit of whiskey, for example, or the spirit of something else. A lot of people take the ayahuasca, and many of them come in direct contact with what they call Mother Ayahuasca, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
Yes, I have some friends that that's their chosen path, and studying shamanism, and it's not my way, but I've gained respect for it through watching them and how they are advancing. But these are people that do those ceremonies with great respect. They abstain from meat, from alcohol, from sex. They watch their thoughts. They're very careful in the months beforehand so that they're working at the highest levels that they're capable of. And none of that other kinds of stuff is going to be an interference or lower their vibration. And because of their level of dedication to it and to their own spiritual growth, it works beautifully for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a real path. Lynne, where can people find your books, and where do they find you online before we run out of time tonight?
Okay. My website is www.LynneCockrum-Murphy.com, and I'll spell that. It's LYNNECOCKRUM-MURPHY. So my website has my books on it. You can purchase them that way. You can also just go directly to Amazon and look up Lynne Cockrum-Murphy or Unfolding the Mystery of Self and find them that way. On my website, you'll also see the classes that I teach, Theta Healing, Access Consciousness, Unfolding the Mystery of Self. You'll also see the online class that I developed that is meditations and discussions and quotes and items of contemplation, lots of guided meditation. They're done through videos that I had professionally made. There are a lot of freebies that you can experience some of that to decide if you want to purchase it. So that is right at the top of the page. And then as you go down below, you see the services, the classes, the books, and the services. I do work with people through Skype or through the phone, or if you happen to live in Arizona, here. And do mostly theta healing, but also can do readings and channeling and that kind of stuff too. So I invite you to check in and say hi.
Thank you. Dr. Lynne Cockrum-Murphy, what an absolute pleasure it's been talking with you. Thank you very, very much. And I really hope that you and I can do this again.
Thank you, Tobias. Me too. It was great.
Thank you. To all of you, see you next week right here. Back up.